So I've recently found myself going down the rabbit hole of video essays discussing where Star vs. the Forces of Evil went wrong. And one thing I love about it is that the fandom cope is in full swing. People are trying to figure out what went wrong when they don't realize that what went wrong was something they were applauding. So let's discuss. Star vs. the Forces of Evil was a delightful cartoon about a wacky space princess from another dimension, sent to Earth to learn how to calm the fuck down while fighting against the monstrous henchmen of the evil Ludo. It became immediately popular from its first episode, establishing itself among what had, at the time at least, been dubbed the animation Silver Age, fulfilling the goofball humor to go alongside the interpersonal sitcom, the surrealist drug trip, the tense mystery, and the one we don't talk about. But at some point, people are divided as to when, Star vs. became something else. A hodgepodge of missed opportunities, dragged out romantic plot tumors, and just overall, not fun. The fan base is divided on what went wrong. Was it too much shipping? Did it bungle the racism allegories? Was the problem that they used allegories at all? Was the lore too convoluted? Were the villains unfun? Well, the answer to all those questions is yes, but the core problem remains undefined, largely because Star vs. started shivving itself in the stomach in Season 1, and the audience applauded it for doing so. See, all the little problems with Star vs. come back to one major big problem. One thing that really put the show on the path to become a terrible, dragged-out, moping misery nightmare of confused themes and shipping. The problem was this guy. Star vs. the Forces of Evil opened beautifully with a magical princess from another dimension who fights monsters with wacky magic and a villain who...
Soon, the wand will be mine, and then the universe, and then... Actually, the universe should do it.
Was perhaps the best villain that 2010 cartoons had. It all formed a very good framework for a goofy show about fighting monsters and doing high school shit, where Star keeps misunderstanding everything because she is a literal alien. Kinda like if Kim Possible and Dave the Barbarian had a baby. That was brilliant, especially given what else was airing at the time. It was probably the first and last time in the 2010s that animation continued to be as diverse as it had been in the previous decade. It's a really fun, lighthearted show to go alongside the mystery mongering of Gravity Falls and the all lives mattering of Steven Universe. Oh, also MLP was still a sitcom at this point. But unfortunately, the creator is a fucking weeb, and y'all know how that goes at this point. Halfway through, they introduce the true villain, a bland, boring misery guts with no personality who positions himself as a threat trademark and sucks all the joy out of the show. He supplants Ludo, weaponizes all of his minions, and hung around the rest of the season until finally being confronted and blown up by Star. Now, unlike Ludo, who wanted to take over the universe because, well, that's just a pretty workable villain motivation, Toffee was a character we knew jack shit about right up until his death, so he was a big mystery. A mystery we could solve in the very next episode. Hey mom, I met this lizard in a suit, do you know who that is? But instead, why don't we spend the next 2 seasons wondering about it? And pretty much from that point onward, Toffee is hanging over the show like a big miserable specter. His entire purpose was to make the story more serious. In fact, Nefsi even said the goal was to get more serious from the start. Now, there's an old bit of folk wisdom regarding opening a series with a lighthearted, episodic, goofy vibe and then deciding to pivot to being a serious, story-driven, and serialized.
Don't do that. Okay. People do that. Don't do that.
From this point onward, the show became a big drama-baity waste of effort, value, money, space, and time. Most of the episodes that centered on the story achieved nothing and ended on baity cliffhangers, and Nefsi seemed to operate on the idea that she would have infinite time to tell her story like a 24-season anime. And indeed, anime was a big inspiration for her, so I wouldn't be surprised if she wrote her story like One Piece, intending to have 1,000 episodes and take decades to get to the point, or like Pokemon, where you have 1,000 episodes and take decades to get to the point, but also people actually bothered to watch you. The problem is, getting serious is a means, not an end. You only do it if you have a reason to do it. And the best Star vs. could come up with to justify all this fucking drama was a bungled fantasy racism metaphor. Oh boy, I sure do love it when writers talk about racism but are too chicken shit to actually do it.
You filthy little mudblood.
In 2023, if I point out a similarity to Harry Potter, does that automatically count as a criticism on its own? Better qualify it just in case. See, the problem with fantasy racism and indeed sci-fi racism is that it always looks like it's trying to make a point about our modern culture and the issues we have here, but either didn't have the stones to do it or didn't have the knowledge to do it, instead covering issues that white people think are over and done with. Star vs. had a big colonialism and stolen land metaphor, which, while considered a contentious topic by far-right loony bins, is still an ongoing problem given the fact that huge swaths of colonized and stolen land hasn't been returned to its rightful people yet. Furthermore, it characterizes these problems as something in the realm of far-off fantasy. It creates enough separation, especially when you have the humans looking like human beings and the monsters not, that that the audience doesn't really have to think about it beyond, oh, it's a racism allegory, and then decidedly not have to go, wait, should I be thinking about that? It creates enough of a separation so that when the silly Sailor Moon parody from season 1 comes back with a secret sad backstory about how she was a poor peasant girl before the queen drafted her to become the new secret Nazi Ubermensch, you don't immediately go, wait, hang on, what is this, the Iron Dream? This is generally why there's a bit of wisdom that if you can portray something directly, then do it. Racism isn't about humans versus non-humans, it's about humans versus humans that look slightly different. But you couldn't make it a different kind of human because that would hit too close to home and it would make the white 20-somethings cranky and cry about wokeism. Oh wait, no, it was 2016. They'd cry about the SJWs and identity politics. But I've always been of the opinion that those people can fucking cry in their rooms like the sad little bitches they are. Hell, Star Vs. has the human realm. They have the Diaz family. If they wanted to talk about racism, they could have done it. It's not like Disney wouldn't let them. They had the Proud Family a few years prior that did this all the time. Hell, they had the Proud Family twice. Except the Proud Family was made by people who know their shit most of the time. And Nefsi does not. Probably because the fact that Marco named his scooter Nacho, is obsessed with tacos, and has 9 cactuses in his front yard makes it clear how much effort Nefsi wanted to put into writing an Hispanic person. And when fantasy and sci-fi decides they want to cover something like racism instead of covering it honestly and directly with direct parallels, they have to invent all new people to be bigoted against, like Muggleborns and Turians and monster. Oh, fucking god, Nefsi, don't.
Fairy lives don't matter today.
The whole story was a big anti-colonialism story, but with an understanding of colonialism that is shallow at best. And the whole thing is wrapped up in the past taboo romance of Eclipsa and Globgor, where Eclipsa was the rightful queen of Muni, and then was excommunicated and a fake royal put on the throne because she fell in love with a monster, and the Butterfly family doesn't actually have the right to rule, but holds it anyway to keep monsters from potentially having the throne, and ensuring they remain an oppressed minority. And the main running plotline is restoring Eclipsa and Globgor to the throne, whereupon Eclipsa proceeds to do nothing because at the end of the day she wasn't really a different person, she was just after some big demon cock. This was what all this drama was for. Something we could have done on Earth. We could have had one episode where Star fucks something up in the human realm and the police target Marco instead, and Star has to get a wake-up call to the fact that her blonde ass could put other less privileged people in danger. That's it, that's the whole story. Single episode, done. This monarchy plot is what takes 3 seasons to work out. Monsters are oppressed. Monster now has right to rule taken away. Puppet leader put on throne, put the rightful king and queen back on the throne, and that's what Toffee's whole deal is. That's it, that's the whole story. And it's told the same way every adventure fantasy story is told, in that characters waffle for 15 minutes, and then you're given a shocking cliffhanger up until season 4, where Disney told Nefsi it was time to pack this shit in, so it ended on a rushed, open-ended conclusion, just in case they ever got renewed. If there was ever a problem with this style of writing, it's that for whatever reason, probably the anime inspiration for being honest, it seems to always take adventure fantasy cartoons so fucking long to wrap up the simplest fucking stories, because they never bother to utilize the first or second act of an episode at all. And people always put the blame on the studio when they can't be given infinite time to spin their wheels. Both Star vs. the Forces of Evil and Steven Universe ended on a rushed finale due to not getting renewed for another season, but they had 4 and 5 respectively to get through all of this and wrap it up properly, and they just couldn't do it.
The Owl House is currently having this problem. The instant they were in a position where they had limited time to wrap this up, they started waffling and wasting time and stretching single episode arcs out to multiple episodes across 2 seasons. Why are you always doing this? Some people have sympathy for these creators getting fucked over by the studio, but no, they fucked themselves over. They refused to get their asses in gear and hurry the fuck up. They moved at a goddamn snail's pace until the final episode and hastily wrapped everything up the moment the studio was breathing down their neck. This is a natural consequence of how they chose to tell these stories. If you only have 3 seasons to do something, you should act like a show with 3 seasons. Not a show with 3 seasons, but there's a slight chance you might get 7. And this is not just the story, the characters suffer from this as well. Like, this is why Starco became such a fucking tumor. Because instead of handling it in 2 seasons when the confession came out, they dragged it out for 2 more with false leads and red herrings until the very end. And there was no reason to do that. If Starco had gotten together when Marco went to Muni, we would have had 1.5 seasons of them going through the same stories just as a couple. That episode where they get locked in a photo booth could have instead been, shit, we haven't had our first kiss yet, this is awkward. And it would have gone from infuriating to adorable. But for some inexplicable reason, Nefsi wanted to tease for as long as she possibly could with this stupid will they won't they plot, and the reason will they won't they is a stupid fucking plot line is because they won't is never the resolution.
They always do!
This is how romance arcs always seem to go. They reach the logical point where the couple should get together, but instead of getting them together at that point, they just let it hang there until the final or second final episode for absolutely no reason and no justification. Yes, shows do this all the time and have done it forever, but there's never been a justification for it. This is the part where I vaguely gesture to that one French show everyone begs me to talk about. This is partially why Lumity was so positively received, because it reached a point where the only place left to go was for Luce to ask Amity out, and guess what happened? She did! There was a whole episode dedicated to Hootie literally locking them in a fucking pit until they did, even though the episode was about Luce waffling around wanting it to be perfect and being told,
does it really need to be?
It's almost like a direct subversion of the trope. Oh, this needs to be perfect, so I need to wait for the right moment. Bitch, you thought, get in the love pit. By contrast, Starversus could not stop harping on about the whole Starco thing to the point that people got fucking pissed off and wanted Nefsy to just get off her lazy fucking ass and move. It was pitifully obvious that Star and Marco were going to get together, and every attempt at distracting didn't fool anyone. It kind of felt like that thing every bad writer does, where once their obvious plot twist becomes clear to the viewer, they get cranky about it and hastily rewrite or try to misdirect. And this isn't even counting the fact that the crew was constantly doing this kind of baity asshole bullshit to other shippers who knew that they were never going to get what they wanted. And when a good show does this stuff, it's kinda cute, but when a bad show does it, it's just douchebag behavior. The question over the show is, why? We're gonna drag out this simple royalty dispute for 3 seasons. Why? You're not gonna know what Toffee is about until 2 seasons after his debut. Why? Star and Marco won't get together until the penultimate episode. Why? There isn't an answer. There is only the question. Actually, no, there is an answer. This is malicious storytelling. All of this is designed to keep you watching. When the story is drip-fed in third act cliffhangers, it's to shock you and make you tune into the next episode if you want to find out what happens. When the romance and shipping is constantly being held over you like a carrot on a stick, it's to keep you watching. Because if they did it in 2 seasons, they wouldn't make as much money as if they did it in 4 or 5. And they might have had to come up with a new story to fill in the other 2 seasons. They knew how much story they had, and they padded it out over 4 seasons because 4 seasons of advertising revenue is more than 2 seasons of advertising revenue. Now, does this model work? Yeah, it does. The sunk cost fallacy is well and truly alive in fandom. I know people who grew to despise Steven Universe, but kept watching to the end because they wanted closure for the time they've invested, and they can't grapple with the notion that if they leave and stop letting it live rent-free in their head, they'll feel a lot better. I often wonder how much of fandom's toxicity is due to the fact that people convince themselves to keep watching things they don't like just because they've already invested time in it. Honey, time isn't an investment. You aren't getting that time back. And wasting your limited time on something you hate is the exact opposite of a sound investment. That is a waste. You only have a limited amount of time on this earth. You might as well spend it happy instead of pissed off. People were surprised when I dropped Moon Girl despite my glowing first impression on the word of the executive producer that it might become serialized. But after 10 years of covering cartoons for a living, when a creator says a show is going to get serialized, I immediately think they're going to have long, dragged out stories that go nowhere for years. They're going to have some kind of dragged out romance that either takes too long or gets dropped and forgotten about, and they're probably gonna torture Lunella for the drama. And 2 of those things are tropes I'm just sick of, and the third is an actual trigger at this point. I just don't trust you. Like, that's the thing. When you say we're gonna get serialized, I don't trust that you're going to do this well, and I don't even trust that you're competent. And I know not to get invested in a show I can't trust. And creators know this. They know a lot of audiences are easily addicted and will keep watching something they don't like out of a sense of closure or the bizarre phenomenon of hate watching. They know if they string you along, you'll keep coming and you won't have the spine or willpower to just say no. I swear, we need a version of the DARE program, but like for fucking binge watching. Starversus practically gouged out its entire tone for basically nothing, creating bland, boring characters in the name of a bland, boring story that way too many people were applauding. The simple fact is that it was the silliness that roped people in. They just had to not fuck with it. And what did they do? They fucked with it. They weren't content to just make a fun show, they had to start turning it into an anime immediately because the creator was a goddamn weeb who mistakenly believed that Japan was the only place anything interesting was happening in animation, chasing fanfic tropes without having a real story in mind. Just serious men show up and then show becomes serious and that mean good. I don't know, Monsters versus Muni? Maybe the monsters had a point, but they didn't have to be dicks about it, you know? And it was fucking bizarre watching people applaud this, celebrating that the show was becoming more plot focused and going, I think it's good that cartoons can have a mature, introspective tone. And then I look at them, and then I look at Star, and then I look at them again and go, she's a fucking magical girl space princess! who shoots narwhal lasers. I mean, if you don't get my point here, I don't know how to explain it to you. It's like trying to explain to someone why you shouldn't put cayenne pepper in cake icing. This was surprising at the time because the notion of cartoons sinking into pathetic, edgy weeb trash was still a relatively new concept. Nowadays, we know the multiple levels of pathetic, basement-dwelling, insecure nerd that keeps demanding this awful garbage. But back then, it was indeed surprising. Like, really? Y'all like Toffee? The guy's fucking boring. You like him more than Ludo? The problem was a show about a magical princess from another dimension who fights monsters with narwhal lasers trying to be mature in the first fucking place. There has never been a more excellent parallel to Shadow the Hedgehog or Prince of Persia My Chemical Romance Edition. This is one of those things where fandom needs to take a step back because every single problem that you recognize with Star comes from the same source, that being doing drama at all. Not only was the premise of the show just not suited for it, Nefsi, like so many producers, just can't do drama because she doesn't know dramatic storytelling, and what she knows of drama largely comes from schlock anime. If anything, Starversus is patient zero for why Disney really needs to start asking people what anime they like in pitch meetings, and if their first answer is an action show, they get escorted off premises by security. This is the main issue. It's why you don't like whatever part of the show you don't like. Don't like the racism allegory? It's because it's bungled and dragged out for drama and uses monsters to make it more palatable for white people, because using human racism would have been too straightforward and prompted a bunch of response videos from subhumanoid grifters. And it's hard to pretend that things are complicated in the human realm because they're not complicated in the human realm. If you hate the cancerous shipping tumor, the reason you hate it is because it's dragged out until the very end of the show for the drama. Constantly having Star and Marco abandon their feelings, get with other people, try to get together, just miss each other, and fucking with the audience constantly to keep them hooked and keep them watching, because Lord knows the story wasn't doing that, and you weren't fooling anybody. We all knew they were gonna get together. It was just shit or get off the pot. The reason it's so hard for some people to recognize this is because the places where the show went bad are the direct result of the things they were applauding in the first place. Fandom is always applauding shows for going dark and mature and serialized, and then acting surprised when the natural consequences of that happen in the first place. I don't know how you watch the first few episodes, see the vibe the show is putting off, and then conclude, you know, I like this, but I'd like it a lot more if it had none of the stuff I'm seeing right now. It's the collision between fandom expectations and reality. I've said this for a while. Cartoon fandom is obsessed with the notion of story-based serious cartoons because they think it will make moms stop laughing at them, or they think it'll be like one of their animes. And repeated failures, critical flops, and money sinks has generally led to fewer of them being produced. And that's at the fault of the creators, who have the same fandom brain take that if they just imitate peak TV and bad anime, they will elevate animation as a medium. And some make the argument that Starversus had to be this way because it's inspired by anime, but that's a statement that needs qualifying. Which anime? Well, Sailor Moon, obviously, but it's a sentiment found in a lot of these other shows. Anime is a pretty wide medium with many irons and many fires, but the phrase anime-inspired always narrows in on a small niche and culturally embarrassing side of it that even Japan doesn't like to be reminded about. When someone says anime-inspired, they never say they were inspired by Hello Kitty or Hamtaro or that silly one where everyone is really sharply dressed and ridiculously buff. No, it's always the shit that nobody in their right mind would ever be caught dead with, like Magical Girls or harem isekais or that entire half of the medium where every woman is designed to look like a child because some guy in the 80s caught on to the fact that you can make a shitload of money appealing to pedophiles and men who view women as pets. So the phrase anime-inspired could mean anything from we have big fights with lasers to here's a lot of genocide and racism. And Starversus always felt like a show that didn't know what it wanted to be. It just knew it wanted to be serious, and it wanted to be like Sailor Moon. Everything else was made up as they went along, and there's your problem. Being serious is not a goal. It's the method you use to achieve your goal. If your goal is to be serious, you're an empty shell of a show. Fandom has to grapple with this notion that serious, serialized shows are not the ultimate goal of television. They're not inherently better than comedic episodic shows. And the reason they so frequently disappoint is because episodic shows know what they want to be, but many serious cartoons don't want to be anything except serious out of a false idea that it grants them some kind of pedigree. This is the part of the problem of millennial cartoon fans and creators still acting like serialized shows still need to justify their own existence. But they've been around for 30 years now, and the debate about position as a serious art form was over before they were born. It was over when Digimon came out and gained a massive cult following. Serialized cartoons now have to struggle with the fact that the talent just isn't there anymore, and they need creators with visions more thought out than just like that show I watched when I was a baby, but darker and grittier. Until that happens, and until fandom stops applauding shows that strip away everything charming to them to chase an award that doesn't exist, we're gonna keep getting shows like Star vs. the Forces of Evil, at least until people realize that they're not very profitable. I know I'm talking to a wall. I know the people who gun really hard for this stuff won't listen to me on this, and are probably writing all of this off on the basis of Lily Orchard is saying it and she's a bad woman. I know, because I watched some videos from a turfy bitch about her. But that's what happened to Star vs. It got serious and got its big villain and its big mystery plot and then said,
now what?
And that's what always happens. Every single time. Because the creative vision started and stopped at being serious and being vaguely like their favorite anime. And when that's all you want to be, it's all you're gonna be.